Hi everybody, and welcome back to Everyday a Project. Today I'm going to start turning my garage from an unusable mess into a shop I can work in and be proud of. The first thing I did was take the giant old TV I had in there and put it out on the curb to get rid of it. It was taking up valuable wall space that I needed for toolboxes and storage. I don't really have anywhere to put everything just yet. I'll build some shelves later, but for now I just need to get all my stuff in a pile out of the way so that I can work. Now I am putting up a flat screen to replace the old rear projection big screen that I had, but I don't want to take up any wall space. I decided the best thing to do was to build a support under my shelf and mount the TV on an articulating arm so that I can swing it out of the way when I need to put stuff up on the shelf. The support will also strengthen the shelves. So first things first, I used a measuring tape to figure out how long I needed to cut the board. I could have gone out and bought some 2x4s, but instead I brought over a bunch of scrap wood that had been sitting outside, left over from a project I did to build a small building in my parents' house that Dad could use as a workshop. The wood was bowed and cupped and way too wide for what I needed, but it was free, and with a little time and effort, I figured I'd be able to make it work for what I needed. So one of the problems with not having a very usable shop yet is that nothing is set up to work. I had to keep moving tools around and even had to use my ladder to hold up one end of the board in place of the rollers or outfeed tables that I plan on having once everything is set up. I cut the board to length on the miter saw. I was careful not to cut it too short because I wanted a tight fit. I could always take more wood off, but you can't put it back on. Next, I needed to run the board across my joiner to get one side flat. Like I said, this wood was bowed and cupped, in part because that's just how wood is, and also because it had been sitting outside in the rain and then got pummeled by the dry desert winds and the sun that we have out here where I live. Once the wide side was flat, I needed to get the edge to be equally flat and perpendicular to the face. Paying careful attention to keeping pressure sideways against the fence ensured that I'd get a pretty square edge. Next, I vacuumed up the wood chips. This is an older machine with no dust collection hookups. At some point, I'll build one into the stand, but for now, I just need to run the shop vac for a minute. Now that I have the face and edge both flat and perpendicular, I can rip the wood to the correct width on the table saw. I lined up the jointed edge against the fence. That way, the blade would cut the opposite side parallel, hopefully leaving me with a pretty straight 2x4. Again, with no outfeed supports, I had to improvise. This is not really the way you want to do this. So after the work on the joiner and the table saw, I have three sides that are flat and square to each other. For the third side, I needed to run the wood through my thickness planer. This tool will cut the top side of the board to be perfectly parallel to the bottom side. With a few extra passes and some incremental adjustments, I can bring the thickness down to exactly what I want. With the planing work done, I'm left with a nice square board, but the edges are very sharp and fragile. In order to keep the edge grains from chipping when they get dinged up from use, we need to dull the edge a little bit. You can use a little sandpaper or a round over or bevel bit on a router, but for me, I like using a chamfer plane. It takes less time than sandpaper, and if you're only doing a couple of edges, less time than setting up a router. If I had to do it for a lot of edges, a router would be quicker, but for this, I like my plane, and it's way more fun and a lot less noisy. Next, I measure for the second board. The first board is going from the floor to the ceiling. The second board is going to go from the floor to the bottom of the first shelf. Just like the first board, we're going to go through all the same steps of cutting to length, jointing, ripping, and then planing. Now it's time to make the third board. This is going to go between the two shelves. I hold the board up to the shelf and mark it off with a pencil. Once again, I plane and joint the board to make it square. Now I need to glue the first and second boards together. I squirt some glue on there and then smear it around with a little piece of scrap wood. Then I clamp the two boards together and go inside to have some lunch while the glue dries. The boards were really close to each other in width, but they weren't perfect. It didn't really matter, but it bugged me, so I took a hand plane to the sides to make them flush with each other. After putting the boards in place, I used a level to make sure everything was, well, level. Sure, I could have gotten out my big power drill, but for the small holes I was drilling, this was way more fun. Would I drill holes with this all day? No, but for some applications, these old tools are great cordless options without all the weight and hassle of batteries. Same goes for my spiral screwdriver. For a few screws it works great, and actually for machine screws like when installing door handles or taking apart computers, I actually prefer these to powered screwdrivers or drills. Now for the third board. I put a little glue on it and then put it in place with some clamps. This should support the upper shelf really well and will give me something substantial to bolt the TV mount to. To find the center of the board, I approximate it with my eye and adjust my combination square. Then I draw a short line using the square from both sides. The center between the two lines is the center of the board. I'll add one more mark and then adjust the square again and test it from both sides. If the square lines up with the center from both sides, then I've accurately found the center of the board. Next, I held the mount up to the board to see where I needed to drill the pilot holes for the bolts. I used the center line I'd just drawn to position the mount in the middle of the board. Once I got the top bolt in, I used a level and some clamps to lock the mount in place to mark where my bottom hole needed to be. I drilled a pilot hole and then installed the bottom bolt. Next, I needed to install the mounting rails on the back of my TV. The kit came with some screws and spacers that worked perfectly. Once the rails were on the TV, all I had to do was lift it onto the mount and then tighten a couple screws on the back to make it secure. Well, there you have it. I've replaced my giant old projection TV with a flat screen, freeing up some much-needed space in the garage. Another project completed. Now that you've seen me do it, I hope you try it for yourself. Until next time, I wish you enjoyment and success in all your projects.